Back in 2007, Crysis had the distinction of being the hit PC game barely anybody could play because it would melt their video cards into goo. Since then, "Can it run Crysis" has become one of those funny gamer phrases that has refused to die, like arrow in the knee and cake is a lie. Next time any of you feel like saying that in normal conversation, be sure to slap yourself in the face afterwards so people actually have something to laugh at. Anyways, even 13 years after it dropped, Crysis is still a graphical standard to aspire to. So when it was announced that Crysis Remastered would be coming to the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch, many of us were a tinge bit skeptical. Can Crysis perform well on the limited power of the Nintendo Switch? Would the foliage be as full and destructible, the lighting as good, with a stable frame rate? Can it run Crysis? Ow. Yeah, it can. Pretty okay, actually. But is Crysis a game you should spend your sweet time with? Well, that's a different story.
Energy critical.
Now, while the Switch can certainly run Crysis, that's not to say there hasn't been a downgrade. Here's some footage of Crysis at max settings I grabbed off of YouTube. And here is the game on Switch. Clearly, it's nowhere near the level of the PC, but it is in the ballpark. Foliage is still abundant and destructible, the lighting looks good, the textures look nice, well, at least at further distances. But then again, they don't look super hot in the PC version either. Character models look pretty much intact, some simplified geometry here for sure, but acceptable. And obviously there is a dip in resolution, with Crysis targeting 720p, both docked and handheld. All in all though, this is easily one of the best looking Switch games out there, without a doubt. That's not to say it's perfect, far from it. Graphical glitches are abundant, entire chunks of the geometry can just disappear. Load times also are fairly long, understandable for a game of this size, but still a bummer. Also, the audio is pretty glitchy. Often, music and ambiance will just cut out, which always rip me out of the immersion. Performance-wise, the game is acceptable but could use improvement. It shoots for 30 frames per second, it rarely keeps it locked, but the dips are never severe enough to be unplayable. If you're a real stickler for performance, this game probably won't do it for you. Otherwise, this is an impressive port and good proof that the CryEngine can hang on the Switch. Who knows, maybe we'll get more CryEngine games ported to the Switch in the future. So yeah, I mostly have compliments for this game's presentation. Too bad I don't have as many for the gameplay.
So, this is the famous nanosuit we keep hearing about.
Man, I gotta get me one of those.
Set during August of 2020, so like now, Crysis puts you in the supersuit of an American Special Forces soldier, whose team is investigating a distress call made by archaeologists on the Lingshan Islands, which are controlled by the North Korean army. Answering the call, you and your team of loudmouth badasses soon engage the North Korean forces on this tropical paradise. However, during this skirmish, you discover a dormant alien presence trapped within the island that has begun to wake up. And let's just say they aren't exactly morning people. Crysis is a sandbox shooter. You're thrown into a big tropical environment with the typical objectives being to decimate some type of enemy encampment, whether it be a base, checkpoint, or munitions battery. Because the environment is so open-ended, the player has some agency in how they want to approach each situation, whether it be taking enemies out at a distance, using vehicles, stealth, or just running in guns a-blazing. Aiding the player is a powered exoskeleton that features a number of abilities like a Predator-style cloak, a combat shield that can protect you from bullets and explosives, a high jump and super sprint, as well as increased strength that lets you pick up and toss objects, as well as enemies. The catch is that suit power is needed for all of these abilities, and a big aspect of the game's challenge is rationing out suit power appropriately. Cloak, for example, drains power faster while you're moving and will short out entirely when the player fires their weapon.
Energy critical.
Misjudgment of your suit power is an easy way to get yourself killed. The best moments of Crysis is the randomness that can emerge from your firefights with the enemy. In a game where you can shoot a helicopter out of the sky and then be killed when the wreckage lands on you, anything is possible. It's a game that likes spectacle and explosions and making the player feel like they're in a big blockbuster action movie. That being said, Crysis as a shooter is adequate at best. The shooting is okay. The guns feel responsive and are generally fun to fire, but the aiming is a little on the stiff side. Aiming down your sights especially just feels a tad too slow. Gyroscopic aiming is available for those who prefer handheld play, which is good. This is a feature that is rapidly becoming a standard with Switch shooters. Enemy AI isn't too impressive. Enemies sometimes will try to get cover and attempt to flank you, but most of the time they will remain in one spot and shimmy from side to side to shoot you. Basically, it's like they're waiting for you to come kill them. To compensate for this, you'll typically find bad guys in large numbers, as the most effective way for them to kill you is to simply gang up on you. Despite their AI, humans react somewhat realistically to being fired upon, but the alien enemies you fight in the later half of the game don't really have any reaction to being shot, making for some of the least satisfying combat in the game. Your arsenal is strong but limited. A couple assault rifles and a submachine gun that all behave pretty similar, a combat shotgun which is comically powerful. I give that backflip a 7. Along with a chunky sniper rifle, missile launcher, and Gauss rifle, which is a beast at all ranges. A great feature is the ability to quickly customize your weapons by simply holding down the minus button and then using the face buttons to equip different scopes, tactical accessories, and silencers. It's very intuitive and helps preserve the pace of the game.
They killed him!
Honestly guys, if I have to be brutal, while Crysis' sandbox gameplay might have been acceptable back in 2007, by 2020 standards it's pretty average, especially when you consider how the Far Cry series has refined and perfected it in the years since. Crysis, of course, being a spiritual sequel to the first game in that series. It's not that it's not fun. Crysis has its moments for sure. It's just very basic and at its worst, very janky. And sadly, the game woefully underdelivers when it comes to being sneaky. Crysis features an underbaked stealth system that feels like an afterthought. My big gripe here is with the enemy AI, which is so hyper-aware it feels almost supernatural. Look at this moment right here. I'm on top of this hill in the brush with two enemies yards away from me. As soon as I get a few steps further, they are immediately alerted to my presence and start shooting. I mean, I guess a black and gray suit with big red goggles would be pretty noticeable in a lush green tropical environment. But I'm sorry, at this distance, I should have a bit more leeway before someone spots me. The only way to get past this point is by activating your cloak, which makes sense, but the limited power of the cloak really only makes it useful for hiding from a passing patrol or repositioning during a firefight. Otherwise, it's fairly mediocre for stealth. What's funny is that the game actually has a meter in the HUD showing you enemy alertness. A nice feature, sure, but it seemed like whenever I got remotely close to some base, the thing would just spike in the red. There were so many times I'd be trudging through an environment seemingly alone when suddenly dink! Full alert. Where are the bad guys? Who can see me? Now look, it's not unheard of for a shooter to have a less than stellar stealth system, and clearly most of the joy in this game comes from doing your best Rambo impression. But my question is, why even have these features in the first place? Clearly the enemy AI is not designed for stealth, so what's the point in having an alert meter? Why give me the ability to mark and recon an environment if the danger of such an act is equivalent to waltzing through the front gate? They should have just made this a pure run and gun shooter and just cut the stealth elements altogether. Now, for all of you devil's advocates out there, I will say this. If you are careful and vigilant enough, it is possible to get through these areas purely through stealth, but it's such a difficult pain in the ass to pull off that it's just better and more enjoyable to rampage.
Something doesn't want us here. Something out there is killing people.
Where's the rest of your team?
At this point, I wish I could tell you that despite the underwhelming gameplay, Crysis makes up for it with its well-crafted and original narrative, but unfortunately, nada.
It's still alive! It's... Oh, God!
While there are some cool concepts at play here, your special forces nanosuits and the ancient hibernating aliens, the actual plot of Crysis boils down to big gruff military dudes fighting the big bad Koreans and the big bad aliens to save the big-breasted scientist lady.
Pretty girl. Not many of those in my field. If I were 10 years younger, I'd...
Yeah, this game is definitely from 2007. While your team is made up of the usual suspects of cliches, your character Nomad is about as interesting as a wet pile of socks.
Who are you? U.S. Special Forces. We need to get out of here.
He's basically there to tell the player, loudly, important plot points and relay objectives.
Shit, what the hell was that?
I was about to ask you the same thing.
It's a forgettable narrative all around. About the only compliment I can give it is the decently directed cutscenes, which are only held back by the bad writing and horrendous facial animations.
You said the samples you found were millions of years old.
That's true. But this technology is so advanced, it can't be terrestrial.
To Crytek's credit, their storytelling did improve in the 2 Crysis sequels to follow, which is good, but otherwise don't feel too guilty if you feel tempted to throw on a podcast while you play this game. While Crysis Remastered is an impressive technical achievement for the Switch, its average gameplay, wasted mechanics, and blah story make it a title I can't really recommend. If you're looking for a pretty FPS with some decent shooting, or are a fan of the series and want this game on the go, then sure, Crysis might have some value for you. But if you're itching for a solid sandbox shooter on the Switch, you're better off waiting for the inevitable day when Ubisoft ports over a Far Cry game. But what do you guys think? Anybody having a similar experience with Crysis or have a different take on the game? Be sure to tell me in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to click that subscribe button, like, and share. It is monumental in my fight to appease the algorithm. I post videos every Thursday, so be sure to hit that notification bell so you are the first to see them. I'm Kirk, and thank you for watching this video. Stay safe out there.